Shocking royal scandal exposed. What happened behind closed doors will leave you speechless. Don't miss a single update. Subscribe now for daily royal revelations and breaking stories. Hit that notification bell. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Kensington Palace as staff members hurried through the corridors, preparing for what was supposed to be a simple family gathering. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases, and everything seemed perfectly in order. But beneath the surface of royal protocol and carefully maintained appearances, tensions had been building for months. Prince Louis, just turned 6 years old, was playing quietly in the East Wing drawing room. His small hands carefully arranged his collection of toy soldiers on the Persian rug, while his nanny, Margaret, sat nearby reviewing the day's schedule. The young prince was known throughout the palace for his cheerful disposition and innocent charm. Staff members often commented on how his laughter could brighten even the gloomiest of days. This particular morning, he wore his favorite blue sweater and was humming a tune he had learned at school. Camilla, the queen consort, had arrived earlier than expected for the family lunch that had been planned weeks in advance. She swept through the palace hallways with her usual entourage, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Those who knew her well could sense something was different today. Her jaw was set tight, and there was an unusual tension in her movements. Palace insiders had whispered about recent disagreements within the family, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. The trouble had started 3 days earlier during a private dinner at Clarence's house. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had made it clear that she felt certain boundaries needed to be established regarding how family members interacted with her children. The conversation had been diplomatic but firm. William had supported his wife completely, and this had not sat well with Camilla, who felt her position as queen consort gave her certain privileges that should not be questioned. Margaret had stepped out of the drawing room for just 2 minutes to fetch Louis his morning snack from the kitchen. She had left the door slightly ajar, as was protocol when a young royal was in a room. Louis continued playing, completely absorbed in creating an elaborate battle scene with his toys. He was talking softly to himself, giving voices to different characters, lost in the innocent world of childhood imagination. Camilla entered the drawing room without announcement. Her face was flushed, and witnesses later reported that she appeared agitated. She looked down at Louis, who glanced up with his characteristic sweet smile and said hello politely, just as his mother had taught him. But instead of the warm greeting one might expect from a grandmother figure, Camilla's expression remained cold. What happened next would send shockwaves through the royal family and beyond. According to multiple staff members who were within earshot, Camilla began speaking to Louis in a sharp tone that was completely inappropriate for addressing a young child. She criticized the way his toys were spread across the valuable rug and made comments about children needing to learn their place within the family hierarchy. Louis, confused and increasingly uncomfortable, started to gather his toys as quickly as his small hands could manage. His bottom lip began to quiver, a sign that those who knew him recognized as the prelude to tears. He mumbled an apology, his voice barely above a whisper, not understanding what he had done wrong, but knowing instinctively that this adult was angry with him. The situation escalated rapidly. As Louis bent down to pick up one of his toy soldiers, he accidentally knocked over a small decorative box that sat on a side table. It was an antique piece, valuable but not irreplaceable. The box tumbled to the floor with a soft thud, its contents spilling out onto the carpet. Louis froze, his eyes wide with worry. What witnesses reported next was almost impossible to believe. Camilla, in a moment of apparent rage that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation, reached out and struck the young prince across his arm. It was not a tap or a gentle correction. Staff members who heard the sound from the hallway described it as a distinct slap that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Louis cried out, more from shock than pain, and immediately burst into tears. He stumbled backward, clutching his arm, his face crumpling as he tried to understand why this had happened. His toy soldiers lay forgotten on the floor as he began to sob uncontrollably. Margaret returned at that precise moment, carrying a plate of cut fruit and biscuits. The scene before her made her drop the plate, which shattered on the floor. Her training as a royal nanny had prepared her for many situations, but nothing like this. She immediately moved to Louis, kneeling beside him and gathering him into her protective embrace. The young prince buried his face against Margaret's shoulder, his whole body shaking with sobs. She could feel him trembling and noticed the red mark already forming on his small arm. Her professional composure almost broke, but years of service helped her maintain control. She looked up at Camilla with barely concealed shock and disapproval. Camilla seemed to suddenly realize the gravity of what she had done. Her face went pale, and she took a step back. For a moment, she appeared to be searching for words, but nothing came out. The anger that had consumed her seconds before was replaced by something that looked almost like panic. She knew that what had just happened could not be undone or explained away. Other staff members had heard the commotion and appeared in the doorway. Their faces registered immediate concern when they saw Louis crying and the red mark on his arm. Palace protocol was very clear about reporting any incident involving the young royals, especially anything that could constitute harm. Margaret knew she had no choice but to document what she had witnessed. Within minutes, the news had traveled through the staff quarters. In the palace communication system, certain protocols are triggered automatically when a royal child is involved in any incident. Senior staff members were notified. The palace security team was informed. And most critically, Prince William and Princess Catherine were contacted immediately. William was in a meeting at his office when his private secretary interrupted with an urgent message. The color drained from his face as he listened to the initial report. Catherine was at an engagement at a children's hospital, and her security team received the alert through their encrypted channels. Both parents immediately canceled their commitments and began making their way back to Kensington Palace. Camilla left the drawing room quickly, followed by two of her own staff members who had witnessed the aftermath. She returned to her private apartments, and those who saw her reported that she looked deeply shaken. She made several phone calls from her private line, including one that lasted nearly 20 minutes, to an unknown recipient. In the drawing room, Margaret had managed to calm Louis somewhat, though he was still hiccuping with occasional sobs. She examined his arm carefully and documented the mark with photographs as per protocol. She spoke to him softly, reassuring him that he had done nothing wrong and that his parents would be home soon. Louis asked repeatedly why the Queen Consort was angry with him, breaking Margaret's heart with each innocent question. The palace medical team arrived and conducted a gentle but thorough examination of Louis. They documented everything with clinical precision, taking additional photographs and making detailed notes. Louis was brave during the examination, though he clutched his favorite stuffed animal tightly and asked when his mother would arrive. When Catherine finally rushed through the palace doors 30 minutes later, still wearing the formal dress from her hospital visit, she went straight to her son. The sight of the red mark on his arm and his tear-stained face ignited a fierce maternal protectiveness that overrode all royal protocol. She held him close, whispering reassurances, while her own eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall in front of the staff. William arrived shortly after, his face set in an expression of barely controlled fury. He spoke briefly with Margaret, who recounted exactly what she had witnessed. He reviewed the medical documentation and photographs. With each detail, his jaw tightened further. He thanked Margaret for her quick response and proper handling of the situation, then joined his wife and son in the private family quarters. Behind closed doors, Catherine and William comforted Louis until he finally fell asleep, exhausted from crying. Then they sat together in their sitting room and faced the impossible situation before them. Someone had struck their child. That someone was the Queen Consort. The implications were staggering, not just for their family, but for the entire monarchy. William placed calls to his father, King Charles, and to his aunt, Princess Anne. The conversations were brief but intense. Charles was reportedly in disbelief initially, but the photographic evidence and witness statements could not be disputed. He promised to come to Kensington Palace immediately. Princess Anne's reaction was said to be immediate and volcanic. She had always been protective of her nephew's children and had little patience for behavior that endangered them. She canceled her evening plans and informed her staff she would be joining the family meeting at Kensington Palace. As the evening fell over London, the palace corridors buzzed with hushed conversations. Staff members who had worked in royal service for decades said they had never witnessed anything like this. The protocols for handling internal family conflicts were clear, But this situation was unprecedented. A senior member of the royal family had apparently harmed a child. No amount of tradition or discretion could simply make this disappear. Camilla remained in her apartments, reportedly making more phone calls and meeting with her own advisors. According to sources, she was being counseled to prepare a statement and apology. But she was resistant, alternating between defending her actions and expressing regret. Legal experts within the palace began quietly reviewing the situation. Under British law, striking a child is assault, regardless of who commits the act or who the child is. The fact that this involved members of the royal family complicated matters exponentially. But it did not change the fundamental legal reality. If William and Catherine chose to press charges, there would be no way to prevent an investigation. In the family quarters, Louis woke up from his nap, still upset and confused. Catherine sat with him, reading his favorite stories and trying to restore some sense of normalcy to his evening. William paced nearby, speaking in low tones on his phone, coordinating the family meeting that would take place later that night. Princess Anne arrived first, her face like thunder as she strode through the palace. She went directly to see Louis, and her expression softened immediately when the young prince ran to hug her. She examined his arm gently, and those present reported that her eyes flashed with barely contained rage when she saw the mark. She spoke to Louis kindly, asking him to tell her what happened in his own words. Louis's account was simple and heartbreaking. He said the queen consort was angry that his toys were on the rug. He said he tried to pick them up, but then dropped the box. He said she was very mad and hit his arm hard. He asked Anne why she had done that, and if he was bad. Anne assured him firmly that he was not bad at all, and that what happened was not his fault. King Charles arrived shortly after, looking older and more troubled than anyone could remember. He embraced his grandson carefully and spoke with William and Catherine privately. The conversation was reported to be difficult, with Charles caught between his loyalty to his wife and the undeniable fact that she had harmed his grandchild. The family meeting began after Louis was settled in bed, with Margaret staying nearby in case he needed anything. Gathered in the formal drawing room were William, Catherine, Charles, Anne, and several senior advisors. The atmosphere was tense beyond description. This was not just a family crisis, but a constitutional one. The evidence was presented formally, as if in a courtroom. Margaret's eyewitness account, the medical documentation and photographs, Louis's own statement, the accounts from other staff members who had heard the incident or witnessed the immediate aftermath. It was thorough, damning, and impossible to refute. Charles attempted to suggest that perhaps the situation had been misunderstood or exaggerated. But Princess Anne cut him off sharply. She stated bluntly that a 6-year-old child had been struck by an adult in a position of authority over him, and that no amount of royal privilege or family loyalty could excuse or minimize that fact. Her voice reportedly shook with anger as she spoke, unusual for someone known for her composure. Catherine spoke next, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. She explained that as a mother, her primary responsibility was protecting her children. She stated that she could not and would not allow Louis or his siblings to be in situations where they might be harmed, regardless of who the potential threat was. She made it clear that trust had been fundamentally broken. William supported his wife completely and added his own perspective as both a father and a future king. He noted that if this incident became public, which seemed increasingly likely given the number of witnesses, the damage to the monarchy could be severe. But more importantly, he emphasized that his son's welfare took precedence over any institutional concerns. The discussion continued for hours, with voices occasionally rising in frustration or anger. Anne reportedly argued forcefully that there needed to be real consequences, not just private family discussions and promises to do better. She pointed out that if any other person had struck a royal child, they would face immediate arrest and prosecution. The fact that the perpetrator was the queen consort should not grant immunity from accountability. Charles found himself in an impossible position, torn between his wife and his son's family. He suggested various compromises, including mandatory counseling for Camilla, public apologies, and ensuring such an incident could never happen again. But Anne was unmoved by these suggestions. She stated firmly that what had occurred was criminal assault, and treating it as anything less would be a failure of moral duty. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when Anne made her position absolutely clear. She stood up from her seat, her posture rigid with determination, and declared that if appropriate action was not taken, she would personally ensure that the proper authorities were informed. She stated that her loyalty to the crown did not extend to covering up crimes against children, even if the child in question was her own great-nephew. The accused was her brother's wife. Charles was visibly shaken by Anne's ultimatum. He had never seen his sister so angry or so resolute. He attempted to reason with her, explaining the constitutional crisis that could result from such actions, but Anne was unmoved. She responded that a constitutional crisis was preferable to establishing a precedent that members of the royal family could harm children without consequences. William and Catherine exchanged glances, and something unspoken passed between them. Catherine nodded slightly, and William addressed his father directly. He explained that he and Catherine had already discussed the possibility of involving outside authorities. They understood the implications, but felt they had no choice. Their primary responsibility was to their children, and Louis deserved the same protection under law that any other British child would receive. The meeting paused while Charles requested a private moment to make a phone call. He left the room with his private secretary, and the remaining family members sat in heavy silence. Anne moved to stand by the window, looking out over the darkened gardens. Catherine sat with her hands folded in her lap, her composure maintained through visible effort. William stood behind his wife's chair, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. When Charles returned 20 minutes later, his face was grave. He had spoken with Camilla and delivered an ultimatum of his own. She would need to face the family and take full responsibility for her actions, or he would not stand in the way of whatever legal action William and Catherine chose to pursue. It was perhaps the most difficult decision he had made since becoming king. Choosing between protecting his wife and protecting his grandchild, Camilla was summoned to the meeting. Her arrival was delayed by nearly 40 minutes, during which speculation grew about whether she would actually appear. When she finally entered the room, accompanied by her private secretary, the atmosphere became even more charged. She looked defensive and uncomfortable, her usual confidence visibly shaken. Anne did not wait for pleasantries or carefully worded royal protocols. She addressed Camilla directly, her voice cold and precise. She demanded to know what could possibly have justified striking a 6-year-old child. The directness of the question seemed to catch Camilla off guard. She began to offer explanations about feeling disrespected, about boundaries being overstepped, about frustrations that had been building. Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time that evening. She stated that no amount of adult frustration or perceived disrespect justified what had happened to Louis. She demanded to know if Camilla understood the severity of her actions and the trauma she had caused a young child. The raw emotion in Catherine's voice made it clear that her maternal instincts were barely being held in check by her royal training. Camilla's response was defensive at first. She suggested that perhaps the incident had been blown out of proportion, that it was merely a moment of discipline that had been misinterpreted. This response ignited Anne's fury completely. She produced the medical photographs and thrust them toward Camilla, demanding to know how a red mark on a child's arm from an adult's hand could be misinterpreted as anything other than what it was. The confrontation escalated as Camilla attempted to shift blame, suggesting that if children were better supervised or if boundaries had been clearer, the situation would never have occurred. William stood up at this point, his controlled demeanor finally cracking. His voice was low but intense as he stated that his son had been playing quietly with toys in a palace drawing room, something he had done countless times before without incident. There was no justification, no excuse, and no acceptable explanation for what had occurred. Charles attempted to mediate, asking Camilla to simply apologize sincerely and take responsibility. But Camilla seemed unable or unwilling to offer the unconditional apology that the situation demanded. She continued to include qualifications and justifications which only deepened the anger in the room. Her inability to simply acknowledge wrongdoing and express genuine remorse was damaging any possibility of resolution. Princess Anne had reached her limit. She stood and addressed the room formally, as if making an official statement. She declared that she had witnessed and heard enough. She stated that in her judgment, a crime had been committed against a child, and that crime could not be swept under the rug, regardless of who committed it or what royal titles were involved. She announced her intention to contact the appropriate authorities herself if immediate action was not taken. The room erupted into chaos. Charles pleaded with Anne to reconsider, to think about the damage to the monarchy and the family. Camilla's private secretary whispered urgently to her, likely advising her to offer the apology that might prevent legal action. William and Catherine sat quietly, allowing Anne to voice the outrage they felt but could not express as directly due to their positions. Anne was unmoved by her brother's pleas. She pointed out that the monarchy had survived scandals before and would survive this one. What it could not survive, she argued, was being seen as an institution that protected adults who harmed children. The moral authority of the crown depended on being subject to the same laws and standards as every other British citizen. To claim exemption from those standards would be to undermine the very foundation of constitutional monarchy. Camilla finally offered an apology, but it was grudging and clearly coerced rather than sincere. She stated that she regretted any distress caused and had not intended to harm Louis, but even this qualified. Apology came with defensive undertones. Anne rejected it outright, stating that intent was irrelevant when the action and outcome were so clear. She demanded genuine accountability, not performative regret. The standoff continued into the early morning hours. At one point, legal counsel was called in to explain the actual legal situation. The lawyer confirmed what Anne had been arguing all along. Under British law, what had occurred met the definition of assault. The fact that it involved a child made it more serious, not less. While there were complex jurisdictional questions, given the location and the parties involved, the fundamental legal reality was clear. William finally made the decision that would change everything. He announced that he and Catherine had decided to file a formal complaint with the Metropolitan Police. They were not demanding prosecution necessarily, but they wanted an official investigation and documentation. They wanted it on record that this had happened and that they had not simply allowed it to pass without consequence. They wanted Louis to know when he was older that his parents had protected him and taken his harm seriously. Charles was devastated by this decision, but he recognized that he had no authority to prevent it. As king, he could not interfere with legal processes, even when they involved his own family. He looked older and more burdened than anyone had ever seen him as he acknowledged his son's right to make this choice. The weight of choosing between his wife and his grandchild's welfare was visible on his face. Camilla stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger and what might have been embarrassment. She declared the whole situation ridiculous and an overreaction. This final, dismissive response sealed her fate, and immediately pulled out her phone and, in front of everyone, began dialing the non-emergency police line. The room fell silent as everyone realized she was actually following through on her threat. Charles asked Anne to wait, to give him one more chance to handle this internally. But Anne was resolute. She stated that too much time had already been wasted on attempts at internal handling. A child had been harmed, and nearly 12 hours had passed without appropriate action being taken. She would not be part of a cover-up, even a well-intentioned one, aimed at protecting the monarchy. The phone call was brief and professional. Anne identified herself and stated that she wished to report an assault on a minor that had occurred at Kensington Palace. She provided basic details and was told that officers would be dispatched to take a formal statement. When she ended the call, the room remained in stunned silence. The line had been crossed. There was no going back now. Camilla left the room immediately, flanked by her staff. Charles followed her, torn between damage control and genuine concern for how this would affect his wife. William and Catherine remained with Anne, and there was a moment of quiet solidarity between the three of them. They had made an enormous decision with far-reaching consequences, but they were united in believing it was the right one. Within the hour, 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police arrived at Kensington Palace. They were conducted to a private room where they took detailed statements from Margaret, the nanny who had witnessed the incident, and from William and Catherine as Louis's parents. The officers were professional and thorough, treating the matter with the seriousness it deserved while being respectful of the unique circumstances. The officers requested to see Louis, but William and Catherine declined, stating that their son had been through enough trauma for one day and they did not want to subject him to questioning while he was still so young and upset. The officers accepted this with the understanding that a specially trained child interview specialist could speak with Louis at a later date if necessary. They documented the medical evidence and took copies of all the photographs. When the officers requested to speak with Camilla, they were informed that she had left the palace and returned to Clarence's house. The officers noted this and stated that they would be following up with her there. They explained the process going forward, including that the case would be reviewed by the Crown Prosecution Service to determine if charges would be filed. The investigation was now official and on the record. News of the police visit spread through the palace staff within minutes. Security personnel who had logged the officers' entry and exit knew something extraordinary had occurred. While they did not know specific details, the presence of police taking statements about an incident involving a young royal was unprecedented in recent memory. Speculation began immediately, though all staff were bound by strict confidentiality agreements. In their private quarters, William and Catherine sat together in exhausted silence. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Their relationship with Charles would be strained, possibly permanently. Camilla would likely never forgive them. The media would eventually learn of this, and the resulting scandal could damage the monarchy in ways that were hard to predict. But when they checked on Louis, sleeping peacefully with his favorite stuffed animal, they knew they had made the right choice. Princess Anne returned to her own residence in the early morning hours. She had taken a stand that many in the family would likely criticize her for, but she felt no regret. In her view, protecting children had to take precedence over protecting institutions or reputations. If that made her unpopular with some family members, so be it. She had acted according to her conscience and her duty. Charles spent the night at Clarence's house with Camilla, who alternated between fury and distress. She could not seem to grasp the seriousness of what had occurred or understand why a simple moment of discipline had escalated to police involvement. Charles tried to explain that striking a child was no longer acceptable in modern Britain, regardless of one's position or intentions. But Camilla seemed unable or unwilling to accept this reality. The next morning, the Metropolitan Police issued a brief statement, confirming that they had received a report of an assault involving a minor at a royal residence and that an investigation was underway. They declined to provide further details, citing the involvement of a child and the ongoing nature of the investigation. This carefully worded statement was enough to ignite a media firestorm. Reporters and photographers descended on all the royal residences. News helicopters circled overhead. Social media exploded with speculation about what had happened and who was involved. The palace press office was inundated with requests for comment and clarification. The carefully maintained veil of privacy around the royal family's internal affairs had been torn away. Palace officials scrambled to control the narrative, but it was impossible. Too many staff members had witnessed aspects of what had occurred. Leaks began appearing in various media outlets, each providing pieces of the full story. By midday, several news organizations were reporting that the incident involved Prince Louis and that Queen consort. Camilla was the subject of the police investigation. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media platforms were flooded with comments expressing shock, outrage, and support for William and Catherine. Parenting groups rallied around the idea that no child deserved to be struck, regardless of their family status. Royal watchers debated the implications for the monarchy and the line of succession. Anti-monarchy activists seized on the incident as proof of royal entitlement and dysfunction. Camilla's reputation, which had been carefully rehabilitated over decades, was shattered virtually overnight. Polls showed a dramatic drop in her favorability ratings. Calls for her to step down from her royal duties grew louder by the hour. Protests organized outside Clarence's house, with demonstrators carrying signs demanding accountability and justice for Louis. William and Catherine released a carefully worded statement through their office. They thanked people for their concern and support, but requested privacy for their family as they dealt with this difficult situation. They confirmed that they had cooperated fully with police and would continue to do so. They made it clear that their primary focus was on their children's well-being and safety. The statement was dignified but firm, leaving no doubt about their position. King Charles was forced to address the situation publicly during a previously scheduled appearance. He stated that he was aware of the incident and the subsequent investigation, that he took such matters seriously, and that the legal process would be allowed to proceed without interference. His face showed the strain of having to publicly acknowledge his wife's actions without being able to defend her or minimize what had occurred. Behind closed doors, the royal family was fracturing in ways that had not been seen in generations. Charles was caught in an impossible position, trying to support his wife, while acknowledging that what she had done was wrong. He attempted to reach out to William multiple times, but the conversations were brief and tense. The warmth that had characterized their relationship since Charles became king had evaporated. Completely, Princess Anne became an unexpected hero to many members of the public who learned of her role in ensuring the police were called. She received thousands of letters and messages praising her courage and moral clarity. She did not comment publicly on these messages, but those close to her reported that she was satisfied she had done the right thing. Regardless of the family turmoil it had caused, the investigation proceeded with painstaking thoroughness. Detectives interviewed multiple palace staff members who had any knowledge of the incident or its aftermath. They reviewed security camera footage from the palace corridors, though none of the cameras covered the interior of the drawing room where the incident occurred. They consulted with child protection specialists and legal experts about how to proceed with such a unique case. Louis was eventually interviewed by a specially trained child forensic interviewer in a comfortable, non-threatening environment. Catherine was present for the interview, which was recorded. Louis's account remained consistent with what he had told his parents and Princess Anne. He described playing with his toys, accidentally dropping the box, and being hit by the queen consort. He said it hurt and made him cry. He asked if he would be in trouble for telling what happened. The interviewer gently explained to Louis that he was very brave for telling the truth, that he was not in any trouble. She asked if the queen consort had ever done anything like this before, and Louis said no, but that she sometimes seemed angry with him without him knowing why. This additional information was noted in the report and raised concerns about the emotional environment Louis had been subjected to even before the physical incident. Medical experts reviewed the photographs and documentation of Louis's injury. They confirmed that the mark was consistent with being struck by an adult hand with significant force, while the injury was not severe enough to cause lasting physical damage. They noted that the psychological impact on a young child of being struck by an authority figure could be significant and long-lasting. Recommendations were made for trauma-informed counseling. The Crown Prosecution Service faced an unprecedented decision. The evidence was clear that an assault had occurred. The witness testimony was credible and consistent. The victim was a 6-year-old child. Under normal circumstances, this would be a straightforward case, likely to result in charges. But nothing about this situation was normal. The accused was the queen consort. Prosecuting her would have implications far beyond the legal realm. Legal scholars and constitutional experts were consulted. Some argued that the queen consort, like the monarch, should enjoy sovereign immunity from prosecution. Others countered that such immunity had never been tested in court for a queen consort and was not clearly established in law. Still others argued that even if immunity technically existed, it should not apply in cases involving harm to children, as this would create an unacceptable moral hazard. Public pressure mounted for charges to be filed. Petitions circulated online gathering millions of signatures demanding that Camilla face justice like any other person who had struck a child would. Legal advocacy groups argued that failing to prosecute would send a devastating message that wealthy and powerful people were above the law. Child protection organizations stated that all children deserved equal protection regardless of who harmed them. Camilla remained largely out of public view, canceling all her scheduled engagements indefinitely. When she did appear, it was only for brief moments, and she looked strained and significantly older. Her staff released a statement on her behalf, expressing regret for any distress caused and stating that she'd never intended to harm Louis. The statement was widely criticized as too little. Too late and still avoiding full accountability, private negotiations began behind the scenes. Legal representatives for Camilla approached William and Catherine through intermediaries. suggesting various resolutions that would avoid prosecution. These included private apologies, financial settlements, commitments to counseling, and agreements about future interactions with the children. William and Catherine were willing to hear these proposals, but made clear that any resolution would need to include genuine accountability. The negotiations were difficult and often contentious. Camilla's team wanted assurances that she would not face criminal charges and that the matter would be kept as private as possible. William and Catherine's position was that they could not control the investigation or prosecution decisions, as those were matters for the police and Crown Prosecution Service. They could only speak to their own willingness to accept various forms of accountability and resolution. Princess Anne monitored these negotiations closely and made her position clear to all parties. She would not support any resolution that amounted to sweeping the incident under the rug or treating it as a minor family disagreement. She believed that public accountability was essential, not just for justice in this specific case, but to establish important principles about how the royal family would handle such matters going forward. The media coverage intensified as details continued to emerge. Investigative journalists uncovered information about previous tensions between Camilla and Catherine, painting a picture of underlying conflicts that had been brewing for years. Stories emerged from anonymous sources about Camilla's temper and her resentment of the attention and popularity that William and Catherine received. Palace insiders leaked information about disagreements over how the children should be raised and what role extended family members should play in their lives. Public opinion polls showed a dramatic shift in how people viewed the royal family. Support for William and Catherine reached record highs, with the public viewing them as protective parents who had done the right thing by reporting the incident. Support for Charles dropped significantly, with many viewing him as weak for not taking stronger action against his wife. Support for Camilla collapsed entirely, with calls for her to be stripped of her titles growing louder. The political implications became impossible to ignore. Members of Parliament began calling for reviews of royal privileges and immunities. Some suggested that laws needed to be clarified to make explicit that no member of the royal family enjoyed immunity from prosecution for criminal acts. Others argued that the monarchy itself needed reform to ensure greater accountability and transparency. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about the role of the monarchy in modern Britain. International media picked up the story, and it became headline news around the world. Foreign royal families watched nervously, knowing that how Britain handled this situation would set precedents affecting monarchies everywhere. Some saw it as a necessary modernization, while others worried about the damage to the institution of monarchy itself. Louis, at the center of this storm, was shielded as much as possible from the media attention. William and Catherine maintained his normal routines, taking him to school and activities as usual. They explained to him, in age-appropriate terms, that what had happened to him was wrong, and that his parents and the police were working to make sure children were kept safe. They reassured him repeatedly that he had done nothing wrong, and that they were proud of him for being brave. The other royal children, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, were aware that something serious had happened involving their little brother and the Queen Consort. Catherine and William had difficult conversations with them about family, safety, and doing the right thing even when it was hard. George, as the eldest, understood more of the implications and was reported to be very protective of his younger brother. Charles attempted several times to see his grandchildren, but William and Catherine maintained boundaries. They told Charles that visits would be limited until the situation was resolved, and that Camilla would not be permitted to see the children at all for the foreseeable future. Charles found this painful but had no choice but to accept their decision. The distance between father and son grew, and the future of their relationship remained uncertain. Princess Anne suggested that the family seek professional mediation to work through the deep divisions that had emerged. She recognized that even if the immediate crisis was resolved, the underlying issues of trust, respect, and boundaries would need to be addressed if the family was to function going forward. Her suggestion was initially resisted but eventually gained support from some family members. The Crown Prosecution Service finally announced their decision 3 weeks after the initial incident. They confirmed that an assault had occurred and that there was sufficient evidence to support charges. However, they stated that after careful consideration of all factors, including the age of the child, the nature of the injury, the expressed wishes of the child's parents, and the public interest, they were willing to pursue a resolution through the alternative resolution process rather than formal prosecution. This alternative resolution would require Camilla to formally accept responsibility for her actions, participate in court-mandated programs including anger management and parenting courses, agree to supervise contact only with the children for a minimum period, and make a public statement acknowledging wrongdoing and apologizing. If she failed to comply with any of these requirements, prosecution could be initiated at any time within the statutory limitation period. The public reaction to this decision was mixed. Some felt that Camilla was receiving special treatment and should face the same prosecution anyone else would in similar circumstances. Others believed that this resolution appropriately balanced accountability with practical considerations about the impact on the child and the family. Legal experts noted that alternative resolutions were commonly used in cases involving family members and first-time offenses where the harm was limited. Camilla's legal team initially resisted the terms, particularly the requirement for public acknowledgement and the restrictions on contact with the children. They argued that this went beyond what would typically be required in such cases, and that the public elements constituted additional punishment driven by media pressure. The prosecution service stood firm, stating that the public nature of Camilla's position made public accountability essential. After several more days of negotiation, Camilla agreed to the terms. A date was set for her formal statement to be issued and for her to begin the required programs. The agreement was documented officially, and copies were provided to all parties. William and Catherine reviewed the agreement carefully with their legal advisors before accepting it. As a resolution to the criminal investigation, the day Camilla was scheduled to make her public statement, media attention reached a fever pitch. Cameras and reporters gathered outside the location where the statement would be delivered. The public waited anxiously to hear what she would say and whether her apology would finally sound genuine and complete. Camilla appeared, looking somber and noticeably aged by the ordeal. She read from a prepared statement, her voice wavering at times. She acknowledged that she had struck Prince Louis on his arm during a moment of poor judgment and frustration. She stated that there was no excuse for her actions and that she took full responsibility. She apologized to Louis directly, to his parents, and to everyone who had been affected by her actions. She continued, expressing regret for the pain and trauma she had caused and acknowledging that her behavior had fallen far short of the standards expected of someone in her position. She announced that she would be participating in the programs required by the resolution agreement and would be stepping back from public duties for a period to focus on personal reflection and growth. She stated that she hoped in time to rebuild trust with the family and with the public. The statement was better than many expected, but still received mixed reviews. Some felt it was sincere and represented genuine remorse. Others felt it was forced and fell short of what true accountability would look like. Child protection advocates generally supported the outcome as representing some level of justice while avoiding a traumatic trial process for young. Louis, William, and Catherine issued a brief response through their office. They acknowledged Camilla's statement and expressed hope that this resolution would allow the family to begin healing. They reiterated their commitment to their children's well-being and safety and thanked the police and prosecution service for taking the matter seriously. They requested privacy as they moved forward as a family. The required programs that Camilla had to attend were conducted discreetly, but were confirmed to be taking place. Reports emerged that she was taking the program seriously and engaging genuinely with the material. Counselors involved in the process noted that she seemed to be coming to a better understanding of the impact of her actions and the UHS importance of appropriate boundaries and behavior around children. The restrictions on her contact with William and Catherine's children remained firmly in place. Months passed without Camilla seeing any of the three children. Reports indicated that Louis occasionally asked about her. It's not out of a desire to see her, but from simple childhood curiosity about what had happened. His parents answered his questions honestly but gently, maintaining the message that what had occurred was not his fault. Princess Anne's relationship with her brother Charles remained strained but not broken. They saw each other at essential family gatherings and official functions, but without the warmth that had previously characterized their relationship. Anne had no regrets about her role in ensuring accountability, but she recognized the cost it had imposed on family dynamics. The broader impact on the monarchy was significant, but not fatal. Public support for William and Catherine's eventual succession remained strong. Many viewed the way they had handled the situation as evidence of their suitability for future leadership. The incident had sparked serious conversations about modernizing the monarchy. But these conversations were largely seen as constructive rather than destructive. Several months after the incident, the royal family faced the challenge of beginning to rebuild what had been broken. The professional mediator that Princess Anne had suggested was finally engaged, and family members began participating in structured sessions designed to address the deep wounds and establish healthier patterns going forward. These sessions were confidential, but sources close to the family indicated they were difficult and emotional. Charles attended the mediation sessions and seemed genuinely committed to repairing his relationship with William and Catherine. He acknowledged that he had initially failed to respond to the incident with appropriate urgency and had prioritized his wife's feelings over his grandchild's welfare. This acknowledgement was painful but necessary. He expressed his love for his grandchildren and his deep regret that his family had been torn apart by these events. Camilla's participation in the mediation was more complicated. She attended the sessions as required, but her defensiveness took time to break down. The mediator worked carefully to help her understand the perspective of William and Catherine, his parents whose trust had been fundamentally violated. Slowly, with professional guidance, Camilla began to more fully grasp the severity of what she had done and the lasting impact it could have on. Louis William used the mediation sessions to express feelings he had been holding back. He spoke about the violation of seeing his child hurt by someone who should have protected him. He talked about the impossible position of having to choose between supporting his father and protecting his son. He explained that while he wanted to restore family relationships, his children's safety would always be his first priority, and any future contact would need to be earned through demonstrated change. Catherine spoke less, but with powerful impact when she did contribute. She described the moment she saw the red mark on Louis's arm and heard him crying. She explained that as a mother, her protective instincts had overridden everything else in that moment. She stated clearly that forgiveness might be possible in time, but forgetting was not an option, and vigilance would be permanent. She needed absolute assurance that her children would never be at risk again. Princess Anne participated in several sessions to share her perspective. She explained that her actions had not been about attacking Camilla personally, but about upholding principles that transcended family loyalty. She stated that the monarchy's future depended on demonstrating that royal privilege did not mean exemption from basic standards of human decency and legal accountability. Her clarity on these points helped other family members understand the broader implications beyond their personal feelings. The mediator helped the family develop new protocols and boundaries. These included clear guidelines about discipline and behavior around the children, mandatory cooling-off periods when tensions arose, and formal procedures for addressing disagreements before they escalated. The family agreed to regular check-ins with the mediator to ensure these new patterns were being maintained and to address issues early. For Louis, the impact of the incident continued to unfold gradually. His parents had arranged for him to see a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. The sessions were gentle and play-based, allowing Louis to process what had happened without being re-traumatized. The psychologist reported that Louis was resilient but needed ongoing support to ensure the incident did not create lasting fear or damage his sense of security. Louis had nightmares occasionally in the months following the incident. He would wake up crying and need comfort from his parents. He became more clingy and anxious when separated from Catherine or William, even for short periods. He showed some regression in behaviors he had previously mastered, needing more reassurance and struggling with big emotions. His parents were patient and understanding, recognizing these responses as normal reactions to trauma. The psychologist worked with William and Catherine to give them strategies for supporting Louis through his healing process. They learned about trauma-informed parenting approaches and how to talk with Louis about what happened in ways that validated his feelings without reinforcing fear. They practiced responses to his questions that were honest but appropriate for his developmental level. They created a home environment that emphasized safety and predictability. George and Charlotte also received some counseling support. They had been affected by the family crisis even though they were not directly involved in the incident. They had witnessed their parents' distress, had been aware of the media attention, and had experienced the disruption of family relationships. The psychologist helped them understand what had happened and process their own feelings about it. As required by the resolution agreement, 6 months had to pass before any contact between Camilla and the children could be considered. When that time arrived, discussions began about whether and how such contact might be reintroduced. William and Catherine were not ready to permit direct contact, but eventually agreed to allow Camilla to send brief, supervised letters to the children. The first letters were reviewed by both the mediator and William and Catherine before being shared with the children. They were simple and appropriate, expressing care for the children and sharing small updates about Camilla's life without making demands or creating pressure. Louis was initially reluctant to engage with the letters, but with his parents' support, he eventually dictated brief responses that Catherine helped him write. This slow, supervised correspondence continued for several more months. The children's responses were sometimes warm and sometimes distant, reflecting their own complex feelings about what had happened and the disruption to their family. William and Catherine allowed the children to set the pace and never forced engagement when they were reluctant. The focus remained on what was best for the children's emotional well-being. Public interest in the story gradually decreased as months passed without major developments. The royal family returned to their normal schedules of engagements and duties, though Camilla's public role remained significantly reduced. She participated in only carefully selected events and maintained a much lower profile than before the incident. Opinion polls showed her public approval remained damaged, but had stabilized at a low level. The incident had lasting effects on royal protocol and procedures. New training programs were implemented for all staff working with the royal children, including clear procedures for reporting concerns and protecting children. Palace policies were updated to make explicit that no royal privilege exempted anyone from child protection laws and standards. These changes were publicized to demonstrate the monarchy's commitment to accountability. William and Catherine made a point of publicly supporting child protection charities and organizations in the months following the incident. They gave speeches about the importance of protecting all children from harm and ensuring that every child had adults in their lives who would advocate for them. They spoke about the courage it takes to report abuse and the importance of believing children when they come forward. Their advocacy took on deeper meaning given what they had experienced. Charles and William's relationship slowly began to repair through the mediation process and through Charles's consistent efforts to demonstrate that he understood his mistakes and was committed to doing better. They began having regular private dinners where they could talk openly without the pressure of official functions. Charles was careful to respect boundaries around the children and never pushed for contact before William and Catherine were ready. Nearly a year after the incident, and after months of supervised correspondence and continued therapy for all involved, a carefully planned first meeting between Camilla and the children was arranged. It took place at a neutral location with both parents present, the mediator nearby, and clear time limits established. The children had been prepared for the meeting and knew they could leave at any time if they were uncomfortable. The meeting was brief and somewhat awkward. Camilla was visibly nervous, and the children were cautious. She did not attempt to hug or touch them, respecting the boundaries that had been established. She spoke to them gently and listened when they talked about their activities and interests. She did not reference the incident or make excuses. When the scheduled time was up, everyone agreed it had gone as well as could be expected given the circumstances. Louis's response to seeing Camilla again was complex. He was polite but reserved, staying close to his mother throughout the meeting. He did not warm to Camilla the way he once had with grandmother figures. The innocence and trust that had characterized his previous interactions with her had been replaced by a wariness that was heartbreaking to witness. It was a concrete reminder of the cost of that one moment of violence. Additional meetings were gradually scheduled, always with the same careful structure and supervision. Over time, the extreme tension lessened, though true comfort and warmth remained elusive. Camilla seemed to understand that rebuilding trust would be a years-long process, if it was even possible. She continued her counseling and reported that she was learning to manage her frustrations in healthier ways. Princess Anne watched these developments with cautious approval. She had not opposed the gradual reintroduction of contact, recognizing that total estrangement might not be in anyone's best interest long-term. But she remained vigilant and made clear that she would not hesitate to intervene again if she saw any indication that the children were at risk or that accountability was being abandoned. The incident permanently changed how the royal family functioned internally. There was less assumption that family relationships would automatically be close and warm simply because of blood ties. Boundaries were more clearly established and respected. Disagreements were addressed more directly rather than being allowed to fester beneath the surface of royal protocol. While some traditions were maintained, the family had been forced to modernize its approach to relationships and conflict. For the monarchy as an institution, the incident served as a wake-up call. It demonstrated that public tolerance for royal privilege had limits, and that the public expected royals to be held to the same standards as everyone else, especially regarding the treatment of children. This lesson influenced many decisions in the years that followed about how the royal family presented itself and conducted its affairs. Louis continued to grow and develop, eventually moving past the most acute trauma responses. He remained a happy, playful child, though his parents noticed he was perhaps less trusting of adults outside his immediate family than his siblings had been at the same age. They continued his therapy and ensured he had strong support systems in place. They hoped that with time and continued care, the incident would become a difficult memory rather than a defining trauma. The story became a significant part of royal history, studied and debated for its implications about monarchy, family, privilege, and accountability. Some viewed it as a scandal that had damaged the institution, while others saw it as evidence that the monarchy could adapt and hold itself to modern standards. William and Catherine's handling of the situation was generally praised as showing the kind of principled leadership the country hoped to see from future sovereigns. Years later, when recounting this period privately, William often reflected on how difficult those decisions had been. He never regretted putting his children first, but he acknowledged the cost to family relationships and the burden it placed on his young son to be at the center of such a significant crisis. He hoped that Louis would eventually understand that his parents' actions had been motivated by love and a commitment to protecting him. Catherine, when discussing the incident in private moments, emphasized her gratitude for Princess Anne's courage in taking the difficult stand when others were wavering. She believed that Anne's willingness to demand accountability had been crucial in ensuring the situation was handled appropriately. She maintained that while the personal costs had been high, the principles that had been established were important for all children in the royal family. The incident also affected how William and Catherine approached parenting going forward. They were perhaps more protective than they might otherwise have been, more careful about who had access to their children, and more explicit in teaching the children about boundaries and consent. They wanted their children to understand that no one, regardless of their title or position, had the right to harm them or make them uncomfortable. The children grew up with an unusual level of awareness about family complexity and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. George, Charlotte, and Louis all heard age-appropriate versions of what had happened and why certain family dynamics existed. Their parents hoped this honesty would serve them well as they navigated their own lives as royals. Camilla lived with the consequences of her actions for the rest of her time in public life. While she continued as queen consort and eventually regained some measure of public acceptance, she never fully recovered the position she had held before the incident. She became more cautious and reserved in her interactions, particularly around children. The spontaneity and confidence that had characterized her earlier public persona were replaced by something more careful and controlled. The relationship between Charles and his son never fully returned to what it had been before the crisis. They maintained a respectful relationship and worked together effectively in their royal duties. But there was a sadness beneath the surface. Charles had been forced to choose between his wife and his grandchild's welfare. And while he had ultimately done the right thing, the choosing itself had left scars. As time passed and the immediate crisis faded into history, the family continued their work of rebuilding and healing. Some wounds healed more completely than others. Some relationships were restored to something close to their previous warmth, while others remained forever altered. The incident became a part of the family's story, a reminder of a dark period, but also of how they had navigated it with ultimate commitment to what mattered most. Louis himself, as he grew older and understood more about what had happened, expressed mixed feelings about being at the center of such significant events when he was so young. He appreciated that his parents had protected him and stood up for him, but he sometimes wished his family could have been more normal. His parents assured him that protecting him was never something they regretted, and that his safety was always worth whatever cost it required. The story eventually took its place in the long, complex history of the British royal family, history filled with scandals, its conflicts, and challenges that had been navigated with varying degrees of success. This particular chapter had tested the family's values and their commitment to modernizing while maintaining tradition. It had forced difficult conversations about power, accountability, what the monarchy needed to be in the 21st century. For those directly involved, the memory of those intense days and months never fully faded. It remained a reminder of how quickly things could escalate, how important it was to act on principle even when it was personally costly, and how the most important duty of any parent was protecting their children even when that child was sixth in line to the British throne, and the person they needed protection from was the Queen Consort. The incident ultimately demonstrated that even in the most traditional and privileged of institutions, there were lines that could not be crossed without consequence. It showed that protecting children had to take precedence over protecting reputations or maintaining comfortable fictions. And it proved that sometimes the most courageous thing a royal could do was to treat a serious situation with the seriousness it deserved, regardless of the personal or institutional cost. As the years continued to pass, the family moved forward with their lives. Carrying both the scars and the lessons from this difficult period, they remained committed to serving the public, maintaining the monarchy, and most importantly, protecting the young members of the family as they grew into their roles. The incident had changed them all, but perhaps in ways that ultimately made them stronger, more aware, and more committed to doing what was right, even when it was impossibly hard.